factor you can conceive of that has changed in Colorado in this period that they should have mentioned?
I'm not an expert on the law in Colorado.
Well, then,
what we can say is in other jurisdictions...
If you're not an expert on it, maybe you shouldn't try to answer it, Professor.
Well, I find it...
With respect, a witness should be entitled to answer the question without interruption.
Yes. We'll just hear the witness to completely what he's about to say. Yes.
It would be certainly not scientific to assume that this massive increase, particularly in crimes like prostitution, extortion, stolen property, could be attributable to marijuana being made legal. I mean, it's not plausible. So I just cannot subscribe to the interpretation that you're making. And I do not know whether the Denver Police Department made that interpretation either, because I haven't seen the report.
Professor, if you look to the right-hand side, at the top right-hand corner, more Colorado youth on probation are testing positive for marijuana since legalization. There are two color bars. The left-hand color bar is a purple color, the right-hand a reddish color.
Yes.
The left-hand color bar is 15 to 17-year-olds. You can see an increase from 28 to up 28%, 2012, up 31%, 2013, up 33%, 2014. More surprising is that if we look at the changes in the 10 to 14-year-old age category, 2012 up 31%, 2013 up 35%, 2014 up to 39%. That's disconcerting, is it not?
If it's significant, statistically significant, it is. Yes, it's hard to know if it is statistically significant. Remember, these graphs are they're all truncated at the bottom here, so that magnifies the apparent increase. These three lines are not scaled appropriately. The change is actually a 4% change here, but on this graph it looks like it's a 50% change. So the graphs are actually misleading.
Professor, universities around the world are not typically conservative institutions, are they? One generally finds...
I would have thought many universities are extremely conservative institutions.
Typically?
Typically, I think they span. I don't think you could say that universities were typically leaning one way or the other.
You're not suggesting that these universities, Colorado at Denver, Johns Hopkins University, Harvard Medical School, Children's Hospital, Boston, University of Kansas, you're not suggesting that they would skew these results which they articulate in this document, are you?
Well, the truth is, I haven't seen the document. Is this the document? Is this the document? It's just slides. This is no data.
This is a document. You can see precisely what is before you.
So they have. So this expert group have produced a set of slides without any qualification.
Much like your set of slides.
But unfortunately, I was here to be interrogated. They're not here to be interrogated, so I can't interrogate this data because they don't provide the analysis. So,
are you a statistician yourself?
No, but I can certainly know whether this. If they have done statistics, I could probably analyse them.
I submit to you, as will argue to His Lordship, this document carries some weight, Professor. It is not a weightless document.
It may not be weightless, but it may not be scientific either.
We'll get to scientific. If you look below, on page 25, marijuana offences in Colorado elementary and high schools have increased 34% since legalization.
Do you know what the offences mean? Do you know what offences mean?
These are elementary, so these are offences within the...
But what does that mean? Does that mean testing positive for marijuana? Taking marijuana to school, smoke? Yeah, I'm not going to comment on the value and the interpretation of this without seeing the full report.
Do you have any reason to dispute it?
I have, because I don't know what it means. What are marijuana offences? What do they mean?
Are you sure you're just not being argumentative, Professor?
Well, if you could tell me what marijuana offences mean, I'd be happy to try to analyse the data for you.
You see, Professor, the problem is that you place no research, no findings, no statistics before this court either. We're at a loss to deal with yours. So we are forced to put up documents of this sort of weight to demonstrate to the court what is going on out there, particularly in jurisdictions such as these, where we can obtain data, rather than experiment with the South African population, that is.
And could I put on record again, my Lord, that I have said in this very courtroom several times I am not a supporter of the Colorado model. I do not believe the free market model with allowing selling of sweets with cannabis in to minors, which is happening in Colorado, is the right model. I disapprove of that.
Could you go back to page 24, or just page one page back?
Mr. Willis, just
Yes, my
before
Lord.
you continue, for my own edification, when it says in this graph that 34% increase since legalization, was it legalized for use by children as well in Colorado? I just want to get
No.
that facts again. I know the witness referred
No,
to
that's
that.
common cause between the witness.
Yes.
Well, I think everybody, my Lord, that it's for children. There's no legalization in the world for children, my Lord,
Right.
but these are nonetheless statistics that flow
Yes,
from...
no, sure.
Yes.
But it says since legalization.
Yes.
So I
It's
just
referring
wanted
to the state.
that
Yes.
in the context of not being legalized for children.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, indeed so. No, there can be no legalized use recreationally, although in certain jurisdictions there may be rules and laws around medicinal use
Yes.
for children, of course. Page 24, what is demonstrated there is 2012. You look at the graph at the top. Arrest, citations for unlawful public display or consumption of marijuana in Denver. 2012, 2013, 2014, and 2015. So what we have is a system where your use is legal under certain rules. It's permissible in the commercial context, but still, this is what the law enforcement sectors of Colorado are confronted with. You see that, Professor?
I do.
Equally down below, citations for public consumption of marijuana in Boulder, Colorado. Once again, a trend and an increase.
Indeed.
Is it because people just become more lawless when they're allowed to use cannabis, or is it that they are more confused as to the parameters of the harms of cannabis?
No, I mean, I would interpret this top graph as that people thinking because it's legal they're allowed to smoke it in public, which presumably they're not. And you could perhaps say the beginning of the downward trend from whenever it was, 14 to 15, that people are beginning to realise the law doesn't allow them to smoke in public or display it in public, and that's clearly a question of education.
I want to move now to black market activity. Professor, what is your logic behind why a black markets will not prevail in a regulated environment and decriminalization of marijuana? What is the logic behind that? I wasn't able to find that in any of my notes on your evidence.
Well, the evidence is that, the evidence...
But I was after the logic.
Well, let's start for the evidence first. Is there evidence that the black market is reduced when you have a regulated market of cannabis? And the answer is, if you look at the Netherlands, which has had a regulated market for 30-odd years, there is very little black market for cannabis, and the black market for other drugs is significantly attenuated.
Are you an expert on that market, Professor?
Well, I have, in the course of my many reviews, sitting on expert panels, looking at the harms of drugs, including cannabis. That stretched back now for over 20 years. I have interviewed Dutch experts. I have interviewed Dutch policemen. And the evidence that they present is very clear that the reason the Dutch developed the coffee shop model, a regulated model for cannabis access, was to stop their young people going to the black market to get cannabis. And it has been a hugely successful experiment. So I don't think you need to doubt that at least a model can work to reduce the black market. Whether it will work everywhere is less clear, but it's hard to imagine why, if you had a regulated market, you wouldn't attenuate the black market. The whole reason why Uruguay has now a national regulated market of cannabis was because the president and the government wanted to undermine, to cut the legs off the black market of cannabis in Uruguay. So there's a political decision specifically targeted at reducing the black market. To my mind, that makes perfect sense, because the black market only exists where there isn't some kind of regulated market, or at least its raison d'etre is significantly attenuated if you have a regulated market.
Professor, can you now get to the question, what is the logic behind it?
Well, the logic is that people who would like to use cannabis don't have to go to the black market to get it.
Do you honestly expect this court to believe that the protagonists of black markets just give up when governments regulate?
Well, they certainly did in some countries, certainly the Netherlands. I think there's been though I couldn't actually quote a reference on that, the same is probably true in Spain, where the cannabis clubs have become very popular.
In Uruguay, you recall the other day that I made mention that only 30 out of 1,000 pharmacies had registered. Let me give you the reason for that, is that those who control the black market are controlling the pharmacies and threatening the pharmacies not to register, so they're undermining the system. That's to be expected, isn't it? That the black market will do everything it can to undermine the legal system.
Well, it will certainly fight back, but that isn't the reason. I mean, to give in to the black market, to give in to the criminals, just because they are difficult to deal with, would be folly.
Prohibition certainly keeps the numbers down. Prohibition keeps the numbers of those using cannabis down. 186 odd million in the world, or in fact the figure is somewhere between a little bit less than 186 and about 216. We'll get to that figure later. So let's just talk about an approximate 200 million. But prohibition keeps that number down, doesn't it, Professor?
Well, the answer is we don't know. We don't know if prohibition keeps that number down. And if it does, then the question is at what cost? Is it proportionate, the penalties, the destruction of human life proportionate to reducing the harms of cannabis? We don't have good evidence on that. What we do know is where countries would have produced reasoned policies to regulate cannabis have done so successfully without increasing use. Use hasn't gone up in the Netherlands since they decriminalised. The fact that, if anything, it's a bit less than in countries where it's, like the UK, where it's not decriminalised. And the reason for that is the black market has to drive use in order to sustain itself, whereas regulated markets aren't in the business of encouraging more people to take drugs. Remember, when the black market's business is making people to take drugs, the regulated market is allowing people to take drugs, but not inducing them to take drugs. I want to give you an example, by the way, since we're talking about very recent...
Professor, is this part of the answer to my question? I want to understand the logic.
This is a very important point. I want to share...
Professor, please, I'm asking the questions. I'd like to have an answer to my question as to what is the logic.
The logic that the black market is undermined by regulation is that people don't go to the black market because they don't need to.
They don't need to. So we know that THC levels in your example of a regulated market, would be a standardized low THC level, correct?
That would be my recommendation, yes.
We also know that all users, not only have they already developed tolerance and are using at much higher THC levels, but those who would be new would also develop tolerance to the regulated levels, correct?
This does not happen. We do not see a systematic increase in individuals using stronger cannabis where you have regulated markets.
I put that to, Professor, I put it to you that you have no evidence for that, one, and two, you're just making that up.
Well, actually, I'll put it to you that the paper you gave to me this morning of one of my own publications on the standard joint unit proves what I said.
We'll get to that
well,
later.
No, let us finish.
We'll get to that later.
You asked the question, there's tolerance. Here we have collected data from a market...
Professor, I have not handed that document up to the court yet. You please need to follow my flow of questions, and you will get a chance to answer that, and I'll be happy for you to revisit this question.
Well, I will say to you, my lord, that we have evidence to support the point I am making. In the Spanish model of regulated cannabis through cannabis clubs, the average joint contains 7 milligrams of delta-9 THC. So we don't see a great increase in the consumption of cannabis in people who use it regularly, because the majority of people want to use it in an adult, sensible fashion. It's the same way. You don't see everyone drinking 2 bottles of wine a night who starts drinking a single glass of wine. This assumption that there is an inevitable progression from recreational consumption to addiction and dependence is just wrong.
Can I ask you to go to file 13?
Mr. Willis? Shall we just take...
Yes, I hadn't watched. Thank you, my lord. Indebted to lordship.
The court adjourns.
just as long as I feel supported.
City trafficking area. It's prepared by the Northwest, for the record this is at page 304, prepared by Northwest High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Investigative Support Center Prevention / Treatment Programs. At page 387, they deal with the United States Postal Inspection Service. The mission of the United States Postal Inspection Service is to enforce, protect, and support the United States Postal Service from illegal or dangerous use and to maintain public trust in the Federal Mail Service. United States Postal Inspectors are responsible for enforcing 200 federal laws intended to ensure that the mail is not a conduit for illegal goods or operations. This is data obtained by the United States Postal Inspection Service in Seattle, provided below by fiscal year. This was October 1 through September 29. For the fiscal year 2014, the year of commercialization in Washington State, 175 parcels were seized containing a total of 301.69 pounds of marijuana. Seizures during the next fiscal year increased 57.71% in the number of parcels seized, that's 276 in total, for a total of 764.03 pounds of marijuana, an increase of 153.25%. Seizures during fiscal year 2016 continued to increase with regard to the number of parcels and the number of pounds of marijuana seized. The rate of increase from fiscal year 2015 to 2016 was 59.78% for parcels and 80% for pounds of marijuana. And then you can see it's then tabulated. Those figures are tabulated in the chart. Now, Professor, my point is that the postal services, for instance, in that jurisdiction, it's just an opportunity for the black market to be able to prepare, use, grow, whatever they're allowed to do in one state, and then to propagate it into other states. This is what this shows, Professor. An opportunity for black market.
Well, it could be, and we'd have to know where these parcels were going, whether they were going to states that didn't have medical or legal marijuana, or whether they were going to states that did. But I suppose if every state had the same policy as Washington State, this would not have happened.
If I ask you just to, you can leave, maybe just leave that file open there and go to open file 11. Maybe just for. File 11, page 512. Yes. Just for the record, this document starts at page 395. It's titled The Legalization of Marijuana in Colorado, The Impact. This is from volume 4, which is the September 2016 issue. Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area. The report is prepared by the Rocky Mountain High Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Investigative Support Center Strategic Intelligence Unit. At page 512, where I have referred you, they deal with what they call marijuana interdiction seizures. So preventing unlawful unlawful possession and otherwise of cannabis, and then it's seized. You can see the point is that if one follows the graph, one sees after commercialization in Colorado how it increases. And then below that, the source says a 2014 survey of approximately 100 interdiction experts estimates they seized 10% or less. Now, who else would this be by other than those who are operating unlawfully in some form of a black market. Professor?
Sorry, it's unclear to me what this has got to do. Why isn't this to do with the legal market?
Sorry, what has this got to?
Sorry, I don't understand. Why do you assume? You're saying because, well, where, maybe you should clarify to me where these things were seized?
Do you dispute, do you suggest that these are skewed results, Professor, and unreliable results quantified in a graph such as this?
Maybe, could I just check that we're talking about the same thing? If you go to 511, so these are, this is the definition of an interdiction seizure then. Incidents where state highway patrol stopped a driver for a traffic violation and subsequently found Colorado marijuana destined for other parts of the country. These interdiction seizures are reported on a voluntary basis. So these are people driving cannabis out of Colorado to other countries.
And they're in transit, it's
Yes.
unlawful.
Other states, sorry. Yes. Thank you. So there was an increase after commercialization, and
Yeah.
people were breaking the law. Yes.
Well, this is the whole point. One can understand that there are always those who will be satisfied with, as in this country, there are many that are satisfied they can grow and use it in the privacy of their own home, as is a possible outcome given the judgment we referred to in the Western Cape. But then there are others who want to be able to deal in it and make money out of it. They want access to the trade in it. Professor, you listening to me?
I am. Yes, I am.
Makes sense what I'm saying to you?
It does.
Thank you. If you could just go ahead to page 529.
But I need to reply to your assertion, and I need to present you with some evidence in bundle 13, which shows exactly the opposite. So if you turn to page 384 of bundle 13, sorry, I was looking at the data for Washington State in terms of interdictions. And I believe it was not the same profile as was seen in Colorado. Just bear with me while I find the page, please. 3. It's 384. So you see there, the top of page 384 in Washington State, there were less
Sorry, when you say page 384,
in bundle 13, my lord.
yes,
So on 384 it shows seizure offences actually went down in Washington State, and on 388, which is interesting, which is the top graph in 388, which seems to me very comparable with the one you show me in Colorado, which is interdictions by traffic officers. You see again considerable fall in Washington State. So it may be that Colorado is an outlier because of the commercialization, whereas Washington State might be a better model for a more regulated market.
This, if we go to let me take you back to 384. If you read, this is what this part of the report drives at. Because if you look at the graph below, that then deals with total offences by age. It reads, I'll read it to you. Despite the overall decline in seizures in the state, and that's Washington State, the activities associated with one age group have countered this trend. In 2010, youth 12 to 17 years old were represented in 29.9% of all seizures. In 2012, they were represented in 36.7% of seizures, and in 2013, they were represented in 69.3% of total seizures. Youth seizures peaked in 2014, representing 73.7% of total seizures. By the end of 2015, 64.9% of seizures involved youth aged 20 to 17. So,
You were reading from page?
384 in
384.
384 in volume 13, my lord. Can we move on to page in the same, sorry, it's a bundle of volume 11, if we can return to that, Professor. We were at 512, we can go to 529.
529.
529, that's in bundle 11, volume 11. This is to bring us more closer to something you alluded to, which states, this is section 8 of the Colorado report that I read into the record a moment ago. This is diversion by parcel. Maybe I should just read from the top of 529. First bullet point, seizures of Colorado marijuana in the U.S. mail has increased 427%, from an average of 70 parcels to 369 parcels in the 3-year average that recreational marijuana has been legal. Seizures of Colorado marijuana in the U.S. mail has increased 471%, from an average of 129 pounds to 736 pounds in the 3-year average that recreational marijuana has been legal. And then note below, just above the graph, the bar graph, these figures only reflect packages seized. They do not include packages of Colorado marijuana that were mailed and reached the intended destination. Interdiction experts believe that packages seized were just the tip of the iceberg. Nonetheless, one can see the increase depicted in the bar graph. You turn over to page 30, one sees there the pounds Colorado marijuana. And then if you look below the lower graph, page 530, there's an indication of the number of states for which these parcels were destined. So we see an increase by 2014 to 38 different states. We know that only 29 have some form of decriminalization or legalization, and in various, according to various models or methods. So the suggestion to you, Professor, is that there's an example of new opportunity for black market dealing in marijuana in particular. Of course, the person sending it is not violating anything in another state, but the recipient obviously would be in violation. That's if you catch that recipient. And then there's a plethora of other violations, whether it's transporting it cross-border. But anyway,
well, yeah, maybe. I actually assumed it was illegal to export Colorado, but maybe not. But certainly, the receiving agent would be in breach of the law if the drug was illegal in their states. And but I don't know why this is relevant to South Africa. I don't imagine you're going to have a huge postal market to other countries, and I would presume if in countries where the law has changed across the country, I don't think we see huge amounts of postal supply to other countries.
Professor, are you aware of the role South Africa plays on the continent of Africa, in particular sub-Saharan Africa?
Well, I imagine you have a leadership role.
Are you aware of how parcels and postage and people travel between the borders, over the borders? Have you ever considered that?
Well, you do have borders, I know that, because I've been checked at borders, so presumably parcels can be checked at borders.
Yes, they would be. But it provides an opportunity for a black market to establish itself within South Africa and expand through Africa, parts of Africa, wherever it's least risky to the cartels involved.
I mean, again, I'm not sure why a regulated market in South Africa would see commercial opportunities in selling to other African states. I mean, and you could just make it illegal. I mean, so I don't think that's a strong argument.
More prohibition.
You can make, well, absolutely.
More prohibition.
I know. As I have said many times, that I'm not in favour of a free market in Canada.
Within South Africa, we have Swaziland and Lesotho, where there already exists a trade in marijuana between the countries. You're aware of them?
I am, yes.
I just put it to you, it's an opportunity for black market expansion, not reduction, throughout Africa.
Well, I couldn't deny it that if people choose to break the law, then there may be a black market. That's true.
Can I ask you to go back to the university's report and go to page 14 of that? Just leave the other files lying there. We will come back to them.
Sorry, what page did you say?
Page 14. In fact, if you start, go to 13. Here the report deals, page 13, sorry. I'll read this. This is the impact on business, because you implied, I didn't mention this in the list of contentions, but by implication, you believe that economies will benefit. Would that be fair for me to put to you or not, Professor? I wouldn't want to be unfair. It wasn't in the list of contentions I read out to you earlier.
So I believe, my Lord, that there would be a regulated cannabis market, state-controlled in this country, would bring economic benefits, yes.
So we turn to what this report describes, and I'll read it. Impact on businesses and the workforce. Marijuana legalization also involves significant downsides to existing businesses. As marijuana use has increased in states that have legalized its use, so has use by employees, both on and off the job. Large businesses in Colorado now state that after legalization they have had to hire out-of-state residents in order to find employees that can pass a pre-employment drug screen. CEO of large Colorado construction company G.E. Johnson has said that his company has encountered so many job candidates who have failed pre-employment drug tests because of their THC use that it is actively recruiting construction workers from other states. And the owner of Colorado Springs construction company Avalanche Roofing and Exteriors told the New York Times that in Colorado to find a roofer or a painter that can pass a drug test is unheard of. The data from major drug testing firm Quest Diagnostics, which analyzes the results of millions of workplace drug tests each year, recently reported a 47% spike in the rate of positive oral marijuana test results in US workplaces from 2013 to 2015. And more detailed data shows an incredible 178% rise in that rate from 2011 to 2015. The same study also indicates that after years of declining drug use in the workplace, the percentage of employees in the combined US workforce testing positive for drugs has steadily risen over the last 3 years to reach a 10-year high. If you look to the left, on page 2014, where I've just finished reading from, that graph indicates an increase in industrial accidents, disciplinary problems, absenteeism, and injuries. Now, I think it's logical and rational to expect that when one legalizes a drug, that you're going to have this sort of impact. Would that be correct? Or an impact? Let's just start there, an impact.
I think it's possible, yes.
Possible or probable?
Well, it depends on the ongoing level of use.
I'd put it to you that it's probable.
Well, as I've said repeatedly, examples like the Netherlands don't show the same phenomenon. And I have to say, now look, I am slightly concerned that all the discussion that is happening here is based on American data. And I am not convinced that this is necessarily relevant to the South African situation. And I have many times expressed evidence from other countries that should be taken into account. And it really is important to understand that the USA is not the same as South Africa, or for that matter, UK or the Netherlands. So it is not necessarily the case that changing regulations in a manner that I've suggested, which actually hasn't been done in US states as far as I know, would necessarily result in an increase in use. But it is possible, and I can see that.
Do you know what South Africa's population pyramid looks like in comparison to that of the Netherlands?
What do you mean by a population pyramid?
Professor, you've referred us many times to the Netherlands. I would think that there would be some relevance to you referring us to the Netherlands in relation to South Africa.
Well, I'm referring you to the Netherlands, not because of the Afrikaners here, but because, no, I'm sorry, if you thought that was wrong. Let me make it very clear. My references to the Netherlands are not based on the fact that they speak the same language or similar language to Afrikaans. It's based on the fact that the Dutch have, as I've said, for over 30 years, instigated what I would consider the best, most rational policy to reduce the harms of drugs, and that includes a regulated cannabis market. That is what I meant. Didn't make any reference to language or ethnicity. It's about policy.
I wasn't referring to ethnicity or language group.
What did you mean by a pyramid then?
Well, Professor, you're the expert. You certainly purport to be the expert. You keep referencing the Netherlands. What a wonderful social experiment it has been.
Yeah.
As if we should apply, as if that is the standard according to which South Africa should be guided in making a decision in the decriminalization or legalization of marijuana. You're the expert. I would have thought that you would have taken into account population pyramids.
Well, I don't know. That is a term, a definition of which I am unaware. So if you could, maybe it has a different terminology in
Well, I put it to you
psychiatry.
because you're not an expert in this field.
Well, give me the definition and I'll let you know whether I know the answer.
Sorry to interrupt, my lord, but the witness has asked for clarification on the term. And rather than assisting the witness so that you can answer the question, my learned friend is just arguing with him. The witness has required clarity. It should be given clarity.
Yes. Mr. Willis?
My learned friend preempted the witness's statement to me, my lord. I'll continue then, if your lordship's happy. Thank you, my lord. You see, population pyramids are constructed around populations and population content, Professor. Statistics. How many youth there are in relation to how many adults there are in varying age groups.
I see, that's what you meant.
You see, the Netherlands, like many countries in Europe, have a negative growth rate. They have many older people, many responsible people, many people who are able to be supported by the state, who don't, in other words, they don't experience the social problems of developing countries like South Africa and Africa at large. In South Africa, we don't only have a disproportionate number of youth to adults, but we have other social factors like HIV orphan homes,
Yes.
where children are not in a position to make informed decisions or to be guided in decisions. We don't have the social construct that the Netherlands has, Professor. Your reference to the Netherlands is irrelevant in as much as you're giving evidence in a South African court in relation to South African people and society, Professor. Your comment?
My comment would be this. However the outcome of this trial, it is expedient for South Africa to review the way in which it approaches the problem of drug use and the harms of drug use. I think I have shown over the last 2 weeks that there are technologies for assisting in decision making that would be applicable here as in other parts of the world, and those technologies should be applied. They are based on a knowledge of how decisions can be made, harms can be assessed, and I would say to you, if decisions around South African drugs policy had been made along such lines maybe 20 or 30 years ago, maybe you wouldn't have homes with people suffering, children suffering from HIV, because policies to reduce the problems of HIV, like needle exchange, like supervised injection, like the provision of sterile paraphernalia, might have helped reduce your problem of HIV. So I think the problems in any country are clearly unique to each country, but they can be approached with the same intellectual rigor, and you should be looking at evidence from across the world, not simply at what goes on in America or has going on in America at present with cannabis.
Professor, how am I to understand that answer of criticism to the complexities of society in developing countries like South Africa? How am I to understand that in relation to the relevance of your continual reference to the Netherlands?
So,
in fairness to you, because you haven't commented on what was put to you earlier.
So what I have tried to do, and in the last over 20 years of gathering information around strategies, national policies for controlling drugs and reducing the harms of drugs, some examples of good practice have emerged. The Dutch one is a very good one. The Portuguese one is a good one. These are policies which have produced evidence to show that it is possible, by using a different penal policy, to reduce the harms of drugs and potentially reduce the use of drugs. So there are examples that exist, and it would be sensible for people who want to make policy changes to be cognizant of them and to think about the strategies when you're developing a South African strategy.
Professor, we'll debate the relevance of all of this evidence you've given, both in chief and in cross-examination in due course before His Lordship, but isn't this all we can extract from what you say? At best, that what lies ahead of South Africa is a lot of research, a lot of fact-finding, a lot of digging, a lot of policy investigation. South Africa has years to go before it can simply adopt a policy and have the free use under some regulated system of marijuana. Is that not the point, Professor?
Well, I would disagree. I think that is dumbing down the quality of your country. We're here because you have the best constitution in the world. I don't see why you couldn't also have the best drugs policy in the world.
Professor, what are you aware, what is your knowledge on policy and implementation of policy in this country and the rigors and difficulties between the two?
Well,
what is your knowledge on that?
My knowledge of policy has come from talking to your local experts.
That's not my question. My question relates to the relationship between policies passed in this country and the implementation of policies in this country. Do you have any knowledge of that? Because our Constitution is only one component in the process of ensuring implementation of policy.
Well, I certainly could not profess to be an expert on how you implement policies. I would agree on that.
So that's your answer to the point I make, that what's needed is a lot more research before steps can be taken in the direction of decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana in South Africa.
I would disagree. I think you should do it. That's not fair. I think what I really think is that you should have some kind of national commission to review the policy options. And if you do change policy, then you should clearly have an ongoing research program to monitor the effects. And if the effects are deleterious, make sure that your policy has flexibility to bring it back under control.
Can we go to the university report, page 20, please? Page 20 and 21 of this report deal with emergency marijuana-related poison control calls in Colorado. And in essence, it deals with precisely that. Marijuana-related poison control calls taken by call centers in relation to children. You see, once again, a trend of increase. You see the increase, Professor, in that graph?
I do.
It shows all ages.
Yes.
Ages 0 to 8.
Yes.
Disconcerting, Professor?
Well, I think it's potentially predictable. Again, the Colorado market is a very unusual market.
We go to page 21. Starting on the left-hand side. Colorado's powerful pot lobby pushes back against attempts to regulate it. My first point is are you aware that even in that commercialized environment there's regulation?
Yes.
And here we read, Colorado's pot lobby has been hard at work stacking the deck since legalization passed in 2012, including blocking legislation to deter use of illegal pesticides that promote marijuana production, suing over restrictions on marijuana advertising targeting children, proposing legislation to move regulatory authority from Department of Revenue, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environmental to a special committee packed with industry representatives, making it more difficult for local initiatives restricting marijuana businesses to be represented on the ballot by raising the threshold for signature collection from 5% to 15% of the voting electorate, sponsoring an initiative in Denver to allow pot smoking in restaurants and cafes. That's Colorado. There's regulation there, Professor, and there is a kickback.
It's the wrong regulation, and this is America. America is a profit-driven culture. If you were to replace the words alcohol for cannabis, the same would be true. The alcohol industry in America has fought an enormous battle to try to stop the movement of medical marijuana and legal marijuana because they see it as a threat to their industry. This is all about industries trying to maximize profit, and that is why, that is one factor in why I believe our analysis came out strongly in favor of state control, not private control with profitability.
So would you not expect that the more the regulation, the more the pushback?
Well, no, because we have seen examples of that, not only with cannabis regulation, we have given you examples of that already, but the same is true. Countries that rationally regulate alcohol, like stopping advertising, have less alcohol consumption, less harms of alcohol to young people. So I am against this. There's unquestioned. I'm not in favour of what the industry is trying to do in Colorado. I have repeatedly said the Colorado model I find concerning because it does allow excessive consumption and it doesn't regulate access, particularly to young people.
On the right-hand side, right-hand side of page 21, Poison Control Center calls in Washington State have increased since legalization. Remember, Washington State was where there had been a decrease in the interdiction seizures of parcels, etc., but here we see they also suffer an increase.
Yes.
In fact, an increase 2012 to 2015 of 67.9%. The source there you see is the Washington Poison Center. And then below, hospitalizations related to marijuana in Colorado have increased over 70% since legalization, an average of over 30% per year. It's between 2008 and 2014. Just for interest sake, over the page at 22, Professor, there's just a brief addressing of edibles. There's a wide range of products which can be laced with cannabis, is there not?
Oh, indeed, there is, yes.
Things that would need to be stored in a fridge, like chocolates, or things that would otherwise...
Oh, well, some of them would, yes,
yes.
Exactly.
Things easily accessible to children
Indeed.
and babies, or toddlers, or children up to the age of 12 who...
Indeed, no, this, absolutely, as I've said, I'm against this development.
Could I ask you to turn to file 13. Go to page 356.
Yes.
This is just, again, out of the latest Washington State report. Professor, in section 3, they deal with youth impacts. And if you go down to the data summary, it's just a repeat of much of what I've been referring you to in relation to youth. And if you go over the page to 357, it's depicted graphically. And I'd like to read page 357, Consumption and Use Health Youth Survey. When analyzing data gathered by the Healthy Youth Survey, using once or more during the past 30 days denotes current marijuana use among students. Then one sees the graph, and the description to the graph is that the graph above shows the rates of marijuana use reported by students in each of the past 5 surveys. There was a decline from 2012 to 2014 for 8th and 10th grade students, while use in grades 6 and 12 were unchanged. For 12th grade students, over a quarter reported current marijuana use from 2010 through 2016. The 1% decrease from 2014 to 2016 was statistically insignificant. But if we read down below, we read, users of marijuana, regardless of grade level, have consistently perceived very little risk of harm from regular use since the 2008 survey. By 2016, over 95% of 10th and 12th grade users reported no perceived harm. 8th grade students reported no risk at the rate of 90%, and 6th graders reported no risk at the rate of 78%. All of these students are simply wrong, are they not, Professor?
Yes, the risks are real and they should be communicated to children. And if I was developing a policy, I would certainly put a significant proportion of any profits to the state into a thorough education program so that children are not misinformed.
Just bear with me. Could we then just turn to the Colorado report in file 11? Lordship, just bear with me. I want to see what I can just leave out, my lord.
Certainly.
I'm here.
Thank you. Professor, if you just bear with me, I just want to see if there's anything I would leave out. If you could just go to page 481. We'll skip through this because I don't think we're at odds on what this demonstrates. But once again, it's a depiction at page 481 of marijuana-related emergency department visits. 482. '83. They just break it down into marijuana likely related to marijuana, could be related to marijuana. And then at page 484, emergency department rates per 100,000. What I mean to demonstrate to you, Professor, is that leaving aside what you might distinguish, given that this is Colorado, Washington State, and different to somewhere else in Europe, the point is that these are statistics that come out of an environment where marijuana has been either legalized or decriminalized to a certain extent. It's debatable what the proper description of the model is. And there's a trend, there's always a trend. And these are not sucked out of someone's thumb. These are compiled with the interests of society at heart. Any comment?
So, I mean, these are Colorado, and I would be surprised if similar data occurred in other countries. And I'm struggling to remember, but I'm sure that the Dutch have looked at this over the last 30 years and have not seen a similar trend. So, this is a free market. This is an active marketing of cannabis products. There will be more use, there will be consumption, more harms, particularly if you sell gummy bears with cannabis to children, which is reprehensible.
You see, Professor, we did not come to court to meet a debate, an evidential debate with you over these issues. It was not foreshadowed in your summary. Now, I appreciate you've given the evidence and we have to address it, and you're tied into that process. We would have loved more time to have had such approach foreshadowed, and we could have had more time to prepare ourselves and come and talk with you in more detail to test what you say in relation to other jurisdictions, whether it be Netherlands, Portugal, Spain, etc. But this is what we have been able to lay our hands on in the course of your examination and evidence.
I see. Thank you.
So that will be the one question of yours that I have answered. Professor, if we could turn to page 27 of the university report. This deals with revenues. It has the heading Revenues Empty Promises. The first graph, the top half of the page reads, over half the pot money promised for drug prevention, education and treatment in Washington never materialized. There's a graph with figures. And then below, instead, much of it was diverted to the general fund. So, that would be the general fund as to the regulation. So education, treatment, drug prevention, certainly in a commercialized environment where one expects that the money flows properly, adequately. This is the lesson learnt according to this document.
Well, it's a lesson learned from one particular American state, and how much you could generalize that to other countries, I think, is very doubtful.
I think my focus there is that that is a fully commercialized model, not the sort of regulated model that you would apparently subscribe to.
Yes, it's not the same model. Well, I mean, it's slightly different to the model that we postulated as being the optimal, yes.
If you could go to page 19 of this university document. This brings us closer to the effects of cannabis physiologically on people. The overall number of traffic deaths related to marijuana has also risen sharply in Colorado. Now, it doesn't matter what model one subscribes to, if users are using, we can accept that regulation doesn't impact on how they drive. They ought to know how to drive and not to drive under the influence. In fact, your evidence is it lowers risk-taking and they become more aware of their own limitations, impediments. But if you look at the statistics between 2006 and 2015, over which period marijuana became more and more socially acceptable. First there was medicinal legalization, and they ultimately adopted by ballot a commercialization model. One sees a sharp rise.
Well, one sees a rise from, I suppose you're thinking of the average of 12, 13, which is about 75, to the highest 15, which is 115. So yes, there is a rise. Yes.
If I could ask you to go to, this is the tabulation of the results out of the Washington and Colorado reports. I want to take you to file 13. We'll go back to the Washington report. I would ask you to turn to page 376. If you look into data summary, if you just go down to the last bullet point of sorts there. Fatal crash data from the Washington State Traffic Safety Commission noted a statistically significant change involving marijuana in deceased drivers from before commercialization in 2013, 7.8%, to 2014, 12.8%. These drivers were above the, and then there's a limit that they impose.
Yes.
If you go to page 381, if you go to 380, there's an interesting depiction. It comes from the AAA Foundation for Traffic Safety. This is the prevalence of marijuana involvement in fatal crashes, Washington 2010 to 2014. You'll see the largest component at the bottom, which on the colored documents is orange, THC plus alcohol, 39%. But if you look to the second largest, it's THC only, 34%. And then the gray area is THC and other. The third largest and the smallest is THC and alcohol and other. So
would you like me to comment on this?
Yes, please, you're welcome to.
So this is quite complicated. So let me go through it. So the first thing to say is that if you're on page 380, my lord,
380, yes.
looking at that graph, I don't know if you can see it, if you can cut, but anyway, this looks at THC positive drivers. So if you read the paragraph below, it says, according to the report, 3,031 drivers were involved in fatal crashes from 2010 to 2014, with 10% estimated to be THC positive. So we're looking at the group of people who were THC positive. And that's only 10% of the fatal crashes. And although we don't have the data here, it's very likely if we extrapolate from other countries that probably half of the other deaths would be related to alcohol. So THC is present in only 10% of the fatal crashes. And the second thing to say is that of those 10%, 1/3, so that's 3%, are THC alone. Just over 3% are THC plus alcohol, and about just under 3% are THC plus other drugs.
Doesn't bear out your opinion that marijuana usage should lead to a decrease in accidents caused by either alcohol users or by marijuana users themselves, because they are limited by their own self-known impediments or are no longer risk takers when they're under the influence.
No, you have not represented what I've said quite right. We've all agreed that THC increases the risk of road traffic accidents. We've all agreed that from a number of studies it may double the risk of a road traffic accident. I think we've all agreed that alcohol will increase the risk by 8-fold, and from several studies, including ones you've provided here, there's an increase. The effect of THC and alcohol is to make things even worse. The reason THC is not as strongly associated with road traffic accidents as alcohol is complicated. It's partly due to the fact that people who are stoned do not want to drive. They have more awareness that they are impaired, whereas people under the influence of alcohol often deny their impairment and try to drive faster than they should. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is there's also, I think, maybe more knowledge amongst people who smoke cannabis that driving is something they shouldn't do. They may be actually more conscientious than people who drink alcohol. But nevertheless, whatever happens, whatever decision is made, there has to be a very clear program to educate drivers not to drive if they have recently consumed cannabis.
We go and turn to file 11, page 415. Yes.
Okay.
At the bottom of the page, this is now in Colorado, linked to the Colorado report. Marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 48% in the 3-year average 2013 to 2015 since Colorado legalized recreational marijuana compared to 3-year average 2010 to 2012 prior to legalization. During the same period, all traffic deaths increased 11%. So we have an increase in relation to marijuana users.
Well, yeah, that's the same data as here. It's the same data
Yes.
as the coffins.
And then The next bullet point, marijuana-related traffic deaths increased 62% from 71 to 115 persons when recreational marijuana was legalized in 2013.
Yes.
And so the statistics keep going. On page 4 and 6. At page 4 and 8, there's a comparative tabulation between 2006 and 2015, which shows an increase from 2006 of percentage total fatalities, marijuana, at 6.9%, climbing in 2015 to 21.02%. Further trend. If I can ask you to go to 436. There's a statement that they make under the heading drive high or drive drunk, which is safer? Bring us a bit closer to your opinions. Our data further suggest that many marijuana users in Colorado and Washington believe that driving while under the influence of marijuana or hashish is safe in general and safer than driving under the influence of alcohol. However, it is clear that marijuana use impairs the ability to drive, particularly among occasional marijuana users who may be less tolerant to THC.
I think that is almost certainly correct.
The next paragraph reads, stoned drivers didn't think they'd get caught. Our research indicates that unfortunately a lot of marijuana users are driving high and many believe they will not get a DUI for doing so. That's particular spokesman Amy Ford said in a statement about 55% of them drove a vehicle within 2 hours of consuming marijuana. So,
I think that's extremely bad thing to do. I mean, the problem here is either that they don't realise that it's an offence, so they're not educated, or they don't realise that they can be tested for it and therefore prosecuted for driving under the influence. And they should,
but I thought
it should be very clear that people should not drive under the influence of marijuana. Absolutely.
We know that in the acute phase of marijuana smoking, and that's whether you're tolerant or not, because you're smoking something relative to your tolerance.
Yep.
You're in a psychotic state. Your evidence, Professor.
Well,
you told His Lordship.
Not everyone.
Exactly how you described it.
No, let me be clear about this. What I said was that smoking cannabis is the nearest that most people, hopefully, will ever get to having a psychotic experience. That doesn't mean that everyone who smokes cannabis has a psychotic experience.
So, do you want to put it a little bit lower now?
It depends how much you smoke. I mean, I'm sure if I was to infuse in anyone in this room THC, I would eventually produce a state of intoxication which would have psychotic features. But the majority of people who use cannabis don't. In fact, I said many times, or several times at least, people don't like that state, so they don't induce it.
Why then do, well, let me phrase the question like this. This doesn't bear out your version, your view, your opinion that it produces risk-taking, because it demonstrates to people the impediments of their abilities, to their abilities.
I think you are just misquoting me.
That's why I put it to you, so that you have that opportunity, Professor.
The question is, why is it that there are relatively fewer accidents on marijuana than under alcohol, when consumption rates in some countries are pretty much the same? And that is because people driving under the influence of cannabis are less impaired and are less likely to drive impulsively. They may still drive impulsively, but so what I'm saying is that the effects of cannabis are not as severe on driving as the effects of alcohol. And that is why there are less accidents.
You don't have any statistics to refer us to, do you?
In statistics in terms of impulsivity, or, I mean, we've looked at the statistics in relation to driving. I believe in one of your bundles you showed a paper on driving and the effects of marijuana on driving. I'm just trying to find my notes on it. I mean, I think the argument was that there are detectable differences anyway in an experimental situation between driving under the influence of cannabis and driving under the influence of alcohol. But more than that, it is, I think, generally now to be the case that people who are aware that it's illegal to drive under both are more likely to disregard the law when they're drunk, because alcohol has such a profound disinhibiting effect on social conscience and behaviour.
You did see the statistics there in relation to the absence of alcohol and the use of the use of cannabis and THC levels, didn't you?
Yes, but these data here on page 380 just relate to the THC, the people who've actually taken THC, and that's only 10% of the population. I don't have the data on alcohol, but evidence from almost every country in the world suggests that half of all drivers who have crashes, fatal crashes, are drunk. Maybe it's different in Washington State, I'd be surprised, but it's probably not different here.
Professor, you can put those files away. We're going to turn to file number 2. So the 10, 11, 12, 13, whichever of those are before you, you can put out of your way now. If you could turn in file 2 to page 133, start.
Excuse me for a second, I need to find this.
Take your time, Professor.
2, I have it, yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, could you repeat the page number?
Page just 133. We're going to start at the beginning of your summary. Now, we're at page 133. Professor, I'd like to ask you, without referring to the summary, so I don't believe it's necessary, could you tell us what are the opinions that you've come to court to give? Do you know if there are a specific number that you would tell us you knew you were coming to court to give? Remember, in every opinion, there would be an underlying premise, set of facts, information, and then of course there'd be the ratio, in which one finds a lot of that. But there must be an opinion, in principle, that guides all of that. How many were there of those, and what were they?
My understanding was I was asked to be an expert witness in relation to the harms of cannabis and the way in which cannabis can be regulated. Were there anything? The potential medical use of cannabis. Those were the 3 main things.
Now, and those are the opinions you've come to court to give?
They are, yes.
If you could turn to page 138. In fact, start at 137 at the bottom of the page, paragraph 2.1.1. You said cannabis is quite possibly the world's oldest medication that is still being used today. You're going to say it is inconceivable to the expert that its use and possession remains illegal. Correct. At 2.1.2, you'll recognize that page.
Yes.
You've been taken to that on a number of occasions. That, to my mind, is the sum total of your opinion in relation to the potential medical use of cannabis.
I wouldn't say it was a sum total, but there's certainly a good comprehensive overview of potential.
And on page 138, paragraph 2.1.2, I established with you on the last occasion that out of the 17, I think only 8 of them are conditions with which you work. Should I just give them to you?
Well, 9, I would say I have a direct research interest in, or have had over my lifetime career, yes.
Which is, starting at the top, which is the first one?
Chronic pain.
So it's chronic pain, that'll be the 9th. I circled what you told me on the last occasion. You told us, as I understand your evidence, that the only two, or the 2 conditions that you have mentioned in your evidence, where you say you have experience, I think, in relation to the treatment of conditions, was chronic pain and PTSD.
So I think I need to clarify. I have expertise, not in the use of cannabis or research on cannabis, but I have expertise across. Therefore, I am familiar with the research suggesting that cannabis may be helpful for those. And I suppose it would be fair to say, by kind of extrapolation, other disorders in which there is pain, like arthritis.
We also know that you explained to us that your meaning associated with the word prevention in paragraph 2.1 is secondary prevention.
Yes.
Did you not mean to say tertiary prevention?
Well,
which you didn't explain to us on the other occasion, by the way.
I did not, no. So I think secondary prevention, yes, would apply to, well, it could apply to quite a number of them, and tertiary prevention to the others. Yes.
So we need to understand, I'd like to understand you correctly. You do not propagate cannabis as a cure for any condition.
Well, I'm not. Yes, I mean, you could see that some pain conditions, some alcoholism, anxiety, they could be a cure for them. Of course, it could. Cure. If you by cure you mean the individual who had the disorder would be treated with cannabis and no longer has a disorder, of course, it could be a cure.
So let's make it even more clearer. Cannabis is not a primary preventor.
Yeah, the only possible place it could be a primary preventor would be in post-traumatic stress disorder, where one could, and it's not been tested, but it's theoretically possible that giving people cannabinoids after they've been traumatized, before they get PTSD, it could potentially be a primary preventer there. I think with the others, that's unlikely, yes.
You didn't give that evidence when you were cross-examined on this by Advocate Bakaba, though.
Well, as I explained before, that evidence was largely, as I recall, around HIV and the prevention of HIV. I wasn't asked, I don't believe, about whether it could prevent PTSD. I don't remember if I was.
Well, that's when you were taken to the meaning prevention. At that stage, you didn't describe primary and secondary, but you made it clear to Advocate Bakaba that at best your position on cannabis was that it was used to assist with alleviating certain symptoms associated with those conditions.
Well, I was talking, as that first paragraph specifies, about the entirety of the envelope of meaning in that first paragraph. When I started getting asked specific questions, can it prevent, then clearly I had to come and explain to the court what prevention means, what forms of prevention they are. So that's why I refrained my answer in the light of what I thought was probably some uncertainty in the court as to what exactly that paragraph meant.
You then, page 139, you then proceed to say at 2.1.4 that you are very well aware of the multitude of ill effects. By that one would understand harms.
Yes, yes.
Same word.
Harms or risks.
Harms, ill effects, risks.
Yes.
Which we have described mostly in this court as harms. That is the term that has been used. Correct?
Correct.
Thank you. And then you continue, allegedly associated with cannabis. So, and then you list them: schizophrenia, decrease in IQ and motivation, that's so-called cognitive dysfunction, respiratory disease, cancer and dependency, inter alia, to name a few. Then continue in 2.1.5, however, the expert is of the opinion that the majority of these alleged ill effects are exaggerated by politicians and journalists who do not understand the science underlying them, lack any significant and credible scientific basis even after many decades of potential for scientific conclusion, and in any event fall well within the parameters of the scientifically established harms of non-prohibited substances such as tobacco, alcohol, and opioids.
Correct.
Now, you told this court a moment ago that you came to give evidence in relation to the harms of cannabis. I don't want to be accused of splitting hairs, but with respect, Professor, it appears there as if you came to give evidence in relation to the lack of harms of cannabis, as alleged by others.
You are splitting hairs, I suggest. One has to look at the evidence of harms and the claims that have been made about the harms of cannabis, and it would be remiss of me not to consider the whole range of potential harms. And as I have agreed with you, that there are harms that relate to some of these disorders. We have agreed on that already.
If we must consider how best to deal with the question of harms, do we start with what we know about the harms, or with what we don't know about the harms?
Well, we should start with what we know and what has been claimed and what has been written and what has been raised as an issue by scientists, by politicians, by lawyers, I suppose, about the harms of these drugs.
You see, if you go back to 2.1.2, you don't appear to have any doubts. You didn't at the time of compiling your notice. You didn't seem to have any doubts about what you said here. Because there's no qualification here.
No.
Am I correct? There's no qualification in paragraph 2.1.2.
No, because it is a very broadly defined paragraph.
Well, under cross-examination, you've had to qualify the word preventing, and you've made it clear to us, as you did to Advocate Bakaba, that in fact cannabis is more readily used in treating symptoms, alleviating symptoms associated with these conditions.
But I think that is included in the overall meaning of the paragraph.
So what I'm really
This is
wanting...
what and or, I mean, this gives us the umbrella overview of the potential.
So that's why I asked the question, where do we start this debate? Do we start this debate with the good things we know or the bad things we know?
It's impossible to have a debate about cannabis without talking about the concerns, which are legitimate concerns that have been raised by you and the other advocates about the harms. That is a very legitimate and sensible place to start, I believe. But it's also important to look at the potential benefits too.
Yes. The potential benefits all lie in the medicinal capacities within the plant. Is that correct?
Well, the medicinal properties lie
the potential?
within...
Potential maybe?
The potential, they lie within the plant, yes.
So what we have is we have a plant which we know, scientists has already shown us, has medicinal benefits within it, potential. We don't know what the scope of that is because science hasn't found all of that. Mm-hmm. And we also know that what science and observation has shown us is that the dangers behind THC in particular tell us about the harms.
That's a fair summary. I mean, clearly there are harms related to smoking as well, but yes, that's a fair summary.
I just want to clear something up before lunch. If you go to 2.1.7, you said there, although cannabinoids, that's at page 140, although cannabinoids are considered by some, who are you referring to there by some? This is now, sorry, excluding the expert, to be addictive drugs. So those, who are the some who consider them to be addictive? As it appears not to be yourself.
Well, there's multiple individuals. I think you've shown me evidence today.
Maybe I should ask you, do you include yourself in the sum?
I do believe it's dependence producing, yes.
Yes. However, it then says excluding the expert.
Yeah, that is not correct.
So we must correct that.
Please do.
Are we to consider that to be a change of your evidence?
No, I'm afraid that's a typo.
Now,
it might have meant including.
I just want to get clarity. You can assist me. My understanding of cannabis and cannabinoids. Now, there are three cannabinoids that are most abundant in cannabis. That's THC, cannabidiol, and CBN, cannabinol.
Mm-hmm.
The only one that is addictive is the hallucinogenic THC. Is that correct?
I believe that's correct.
So that statement is wrong. Although cannabinoids are considered by some to be addictive, one needed to insert their THC, or the cannabinoid THC. Would that be correct?
It depends if you're referring to the sum or to me. So the sum, unfortunately, would include other people who have the view that potentially other components of the plant might be addictive. I don't believe anyone seriously thinks that cannabidiol is, although in some countries it's treated as an illegal drug. In my country it's treated as a non-illegal drug because our experts believe it isn't addictive. Cannabinol is almost certainly, I think, not addictive.
It's a metabolite of THC, so That's THC breaking down and...
But also, there are other components. There's the one I mentioned a few days ago, the possible antidote, the sort of anti-schizophrenia drug, anti-psychosis drug, the component called THCV, which I don't believe is dependence-producing or even psychoactive in the sense of producing a high, but some governments have decided it is, which is why it's illegal.
So what your statement should read is that although the cannabinoid THC is considered by some to be addictive, their addictive potential, its predictive potential is considerably lower than other agents. That really doesn't cover the subject matter the way it's phrased there, does it? It expands it beyond what we're discussing in this court. It's THC which is the addictive component. That is your evidence.
I believe largely it is, yes, that's true.
Lord, might that be an opportune time to take the adjournment?
Yes, we'll take the adjournment.